chance, are you an entrepreneur navigating two different worlds, the new and the creative world versus the old and the previous, the traditional way of doing things? Today, I'm sitting down with my childhood friend, Victoria Suen, who has built up a successful architecture firm approaching to a 7-figure mark. And she shares her success journey despite graduating into a relatively low-income architect job. Stick around until the end where she shares her mindset shifts, overcome obstacles, and build a business that she is proud of today. Let's jump into the episode. Hold on, we turned off the camera, but we turned it back on because this conversation was so good. What were you saying about how you didn't want to become an architect?
For a good while, like architecture school was so difficult that I was like, I don't know if I even want to be an architect, let alone start an architecture business, right? But
you knew how bad the business model was.
Yeah, like in some ways, like because, and we touched on it, like architects don't make that much money compared to like the education, the amount
and like
of work.
What are we talking about here, number figure
like again
wise?
Like coming out of undergrad, I made less than 40K.
Yeah.
And I worked in a smaller town outside of like Toronto, which is like the biggest city in Toronto or in Canada. So like I worked at a smaller city in Waterloo and I was making under 40K and I was like, geez, I have an undergraduate degree and I'm making less than I was as an intern, but that's all they would offer me.
Where's the social promise? I went through school.
Yeah, exactly. Where I was like, I thought I was gonna get a good salary after like finishing university. That's what I was promised, right?
Yeah.
So like thinking about business and thinking about what I like, there's always a bit of a conflict because like if I'm gonna be in architecture and let's say utilize those skills and be an architect, like that's a bad business. So I think I like to your question. It's like, yeah, I didn't want to be an architect per se, and I didn't want to start an architecture business. But ultimately, I ended up doing that.
Process, yeah.
Yeah, kind of let that kind of unfold because like that's what I knew, that's what I had a passionate for, and like that was, that was my skill. Like if I was gonna lean on any skill, any value that I could bring to people, it was architecture,
It's a
right?
creative skill, right?
It was the creative skill, yeah. And then another passion I had was like renovating. I ended up like buying a place and renovating, and I did it for myself. And then naturally people began to see that. You're like, oh, you're an architect, you have certain skills. I am in need of those skills. Can you help me?
Right.
And I was like, okay, well, yeah, sure. I can provide those services. So even though in the back of my mind, I was like, architecture is such a bad business model, in my opinion. But people are asking and want these skills. I'm just going to follow that. And then here I am now, like we have like a decently successful company. I'm like, okay, it's not so bad after all.
I think you're multiple 6 figures. Maybe you're now 7 figures.
Yeah. So I think we're like decently kind of successful and just following that path. Like, how do I continue just to bring value in the skills that I have?
What does architecture mean to you? And how do you leverage it to build what you've built up so far? And before you answer, like some people might say, oh, it's just an episode with an architecture. Like, no, folks, like you have to understand this person is like one of those Asian people that are very, very humble. They have a stacked resume. And not only are you like a professor at university college, you also invested like real estate at the age of 19 and you've done so many other things. And I think it runs in your family too. Like your sister
I'd say my sister is wildly more successful than me.
Dragon's Den or something. So.
Yeah, exactly. So,
but yeah, we'll start there. Yeah,
definitely comes. I guess like with the territory, like my sister is very entrepreneurial. I think we're always a little bit competitive. Definitely had that like classic immigrant family story, like my parents immigrated to Canada. They had dreams of like us going to school, being successful, get a good job and that kind of thing. And ultimately I landed in architecture. Again, very cliche example. I love Lego and I love building things. I love the creative aspect. I remember playing with Lego. I'd always like play with like my sister and we'd make like funny stories with the Lego.
With Legos,
like,
yeah.
We were kind of like
that.
playing like, I don't know, we create creative like storylines, we'd build things. It's just, I love that whole like imaginary world to it.
Yeah.
But going back to your question about what is architecture to me, like I think it's actually funny because I think I didn't even fully understand what I was getting into when going into architecture school.
Yeah.
And and like also funny, like growing up in Mississauga is like the pinnacle of what not to do in architecture, right? Like suburban homes, you're like almost like copy and pasting
Yeah,
houses.
yeah.
It's not really architecture, good urban design, like
Right.
suburban sprawl and whatnot.
For
So
the listeners who don't know where Mississauga is, it's a city beside Toronto, but
yeah,
it's not designed, I
yeah,
guess.
it's not the, yeah, it's like suburban sprawl, right?
Mm,
Like I think it's just not the best example of urbanism. So growing up in that way, going to architecture school, it was just like, if anything, it was just like questioning everything that I've known. It's like, oh, like this is not how you should build,
right.
and there's another way of living. Like
Mm,
I think just growing up in a suburb of Toronto, it was kind of just like everything was assumed this is the way.
mm,
So going into university, going into architecture school, it was almost like, oh, this is not the way it should be, or like it could be done a different way. And
mm,
architecture to me is about like questioning how you live and how do you work,
mm,
and creating an environment, and the importance of building, because you create the environments that people live and act.
mm.
And in some ways it can be incredibly powerful, because you ultimately are creating the world that people are living and working and playing in.
Yeah.
And who gets control of that. And I guess university just opened up a can of worms of like thinking of the world in so many different ways. And especially the school that I was at the University of Waterloo in architecture. It really had a theoretical component to it,
Yeah.
where you're just thinking about all the
Is it like building theory or?
no, just like social issues, cultural
Oh,
issues.
interesting. Mm.
Very much again like questioning, like
Why-
and thinking about it more from a philosophical point of view.
Okay.
So that's, I think I definitely lean on that. Even now I'm like an architect and building things, it's very practical.
Yeah.
I still think back to that kind of learning in school and think about like, what does it mean to be part of architecture, and what are you bringing to the world, and how can it be used for good, but how can it be used for bad. Potentially, and what is our role in all of it. You're constantly questioning that. And I think that's where it can be I don't know, just like quite an interesting thought process of like, where am I, what am I doing, what am I adding to the world, is this
That's
good,
true.
is this bad? It's not always black and white, but definitely lots of questions.
And when I think about architecture, and even before like jumping into this whole social media things, like you and I also crossed paths when I was in my phase of doing real estate. And I had a phase of my life when I was getting married. I'm like, oh, I want to build a dream house kitchen, right? And so bringing that to reality made me realize there's so many steps that a person has to go through. And I think this topic of building something that's in your mind, or that you're trying to create from your mind into the world.
Yes.
I think that's some of the principles I love to highlight in the episode today. And so we define architecture. It's questioning a lot of things, how people moving, or how are people living from that, or living in a good way or a bad way. In your experience, I mean, you've worked on grand projects with like, can I name them, like
Sure,
like
yeah.
Shopify, and like there's a recent one you've done in I think in Oakville called, what was it called? It was called
Upgrade Labs.
Upgrade Labs, right. And so when these clients are coming to you with ideas, right? How do you first navigate? And are there like common misconceptions that they have around working with architectures if they're like someone new?
Yeah, like I think it's about the process, right? Like sometimes clients don't know what their role is in the whole project, right? And I think I like to start from a process of like understanding like what your goals are, but like not in a way that you're telling me directly. So the kitchen example, like I would like to ask questions of like, how do you live? Like how do you use your kitchen? You know, do you primarily, spend your times there? Is it like you cooking right after school and then like your kids are playing in the living room? So
Yeah.
then like, okay, like when you begin to describe that, we can begin to think about like the role the kitchen has in your household. And then maybe from there, I begin to spatialize that by thinking like, okay, if your kids are playing in the living room and you're cooking in the kitchen, prepping for dinner,
Right.
maybe that visual connection is very important, and like opening up to the living room is important.
Yeah.
But like I'd prefer you describe, how do you live your life? What are the qualities that you appreciate?
Yeah.
And then from there, I could think about spatial concepts, ideas that would be relevant to achieve those goals, like opening up the kitchen to the living room, as opposed to sometimes clients feel like they need to tell us exactly, like I would like a Frigidaire 30-inch.
Oh, like a specific
and then like
appliance.
this is so you are really just drafting what I have in mind, as opposed to you generally telling me like what are the qualities and things that you appreciate, and then I'll come up with the design solutions for that, right? So like on the extreme end, sometimes we're treated as like just the drafting pencil, you just like do this, but I have it all in my mind.
Right.
Versus I think the power of an architect is like, or a designer, is that we can take all the ideas that are maybe a bit more abstract in your mind and then spatialize it, like turn it into interior renovation or like a house or whatever the building is. So I think that's one of the key aspects, turning something abstract like an idea into something physical. And that translation is, can be a challenging process.
And from what I've seen you do these days, and I guess this is sort of common in the States as well as Canada, like there's that term in the real estate called missing middle. And you're, I think, one of the biggest players attacking this. But what that basically means is like you have a house, but because there's so many other people, there's a demand for it. So you're taking that house and like, how would you word it? Like you're compartmentalizing. My ESL is coming out.
I guess like on one hand we're compartmentalizing. I don't know.
That's the word. Yes, compartmentalizing.
But like we're sometimes dividing the building into multiple units. I guess to go into that a little bit, like the missing middle exists because on one hand, this exists in like North America, like across cities, but single family homes. We have single family neighborhoods. That's the way that cities are zoned and really encouraged to build. And the other hand, you have downtown areas that are encouraged to build like big condo buildings, 20, 30, 50 stories, right? So there's this gap in between, right? Like you either have a single family home or you have like 100+ units, right?
Condos,
And there isn't something in between. But if you think of good examples of cities like, let's say Paris or like New York, there is this like middle ground where you have maybe like a store on the bottom and then you have a couple stories on top, which is our like apartments. And then now like cities like Toronto are recognizing like, okay, like there's so much housing that could be unlocked if we just allowed for this single family neighborhood to have multiple units and
way to build.
Exactly. So we're involved in a lot of those projects now, and it's a lot of fun, like being able to see your projects, being designed and built and having like hopefully I think like a good effect on the city.
I love this topic because again, I think back to the time when I bought my house to do the rentals, and it's just like a side tangent story. Like I want to break this particular wall down so bad.
Right.
It was like, I want to go down, and I didn't know there was such a complicated process around that. But what I want to highlight was, I think entrepreneurs in today's time is also faced with a similar dilemma in that they see this missing middle, whether if it's learning how to make money online, or whether it's learning how to scale through digital social media or things of that nature. And there's a lot of constraints. As you mentioned, like Toronto, the land has a constraint. There's also constraint in the rules and laws. And sometimes there's financial constraints as well, right? And so in terms of principle basis, I want to talk about when somebody's coming to you and say, hey, I have a house in Toronto. I want to make it as 3 or 4 different units. I just have 1 unit right now. What are common constraints that you see? And are there like rules about building principles that you cannot sort of like break as you're building and helping architect
Yeah.
this project?
Yeah, no, it's good that you bring up that point. I think like that's always one of the questions I ask like a client, like
Mm,
what are my constraints to work
mm,
within, right?
yeah.
And
Money is
architect
for sure.
yeah, exactly.
How
That
much money do you have, first of all?
exactly. That's like how much money are we dealing with? Like
Yeah.
architects get a bad rap for like
Mm,
designing the world, and you're like, oh, like it's outside of my budget. Like I can't really
mm.
build this anymore. So it's kind of like that is the number one question. Like what
Is
is
that is
the
that a
financial
thing between architects, like the money?
sometimes I don't
Mm,
know. Like it's funny. Like I think architects have a certain reputation that
mm,
like in some ways I'm not fully aware of because like I'm
yeah.
like but like in movies
Mm-mm.
or even
It's
like
portrayed.
sometimes
Yeah.
yeah
Yeah.
it's just like architect big ego just cares
Mm.
about what they want to build
Oh,
and like
okay.
wants to
That's how
build
you're
like
defining.
the
Yep.
dream thing, you know.
It's like
So
somebody in Malibu or like a state somewhere,
yeah.
just like, I'm gonna build this 30 million. Boom.
Exactly. Napkin sketch. Here you go.
Yeah, yeah,
I'm gonna build
yeah.
this. It doesn't matter how much it costs. It
But
just
that's
needs to
not
be
how it
beautiful.
works,
And
right?
that's I don't know. Like there are architects that work that way, but not all architects are like that.
Yeah.
So yeah, I like to think of financial constraints, but you know, like I guess the limits are like building code ultimately, right? Like
Mm.
you can't build a building that's gonna fall down
Yep.
and that limit is the building code, so it's the absolute minimums.
Mm.
But I always like to say like just because you're meeting building code doesn't mean you're meeting good design, right? So if you're just at the basic building code, you're probably not like it's not a good design, you know. Like
Mm.
an example is like the bedroom, right? If you're meeting the minimum room sizes, it's probably not a very nice bedroom, right? We're
Mm.
not thinking about like how does somebody flow through here and
Mm.
how does somebody use that space. Like
Yeah.
those considerations are kind of not being considered at a certain point because you're just meeting the bare minimum.
Mm.
But yeah, like I think working with constraints is great when it comes to design because then it kind of give us like some context of like what should we design within.
Mm.
Sometimes it's more challenging if you give us no constraints because like okay like,
Oh, okay.
right?
No constraints. Yeah.
Because like is it truly no constraints or
Yeah.
you're telling me there's no constraints and then I
As
give
you
lots of
find-
different things and then after you're like well actually I don't like that and
Yeah.
like that gets slowly revealed when you get feedback. But yeah, like I think working within constraints can be very helpful when it comes to the design process.
When do you find the most satisfaction? Because I think, yeah, you're right. when you do there's a minimum of building code, and then there is the design aspect, which I think, depending on the type of architects that people choose to, I guess, work with, they have their own design that they're wanting to lean into, right? And so, are there projects that you find you're like, oh, when I work through this, I learned this, like, and because the end result, you didn't really like it. Whereas another project, you're like, now that I've fixed that problem, like I'm really satisfied with this design. Are you able to talk about some of the projects you've worked on that one was really great and one you were like, maybe for the next project, I'll tweak a couple things here and there?
Yeah, I guess it'd be interesting to think about. I think like one aspect that's like very rewarding is like when we say a client has like a goal in mind. Let's say like they want to like do a 10 unit project and then like we find ways to like exceed their expectations, whether it's like more units or
Yeah, I was
we're
gonna say,
able to
like, rather than 10, we got you 11. It's
yeah, that like that's the developer example.
Mm.
But like if we can circumvent certain processes so that we can like make it faster, we can avoid like going to the committee for variances like that, like again, so like making the process smoother. So I think
What's a variance for the people that listening that are
so a variance is like when you're getting approvals with the city, if you need like additional building height or like setback for your house, like setback from the property line, then we can go to the city for a special permission to get that built, even though it's not quite perfectly fitting within the rules.
Yep.
But that process
that's what a variance. Yeah.
Exactly. So that process of getting the variance approved takes 3 to 6 months in Toronto. So that's time and money for the client. So if we can avoid that process altogether, then it's definitely beneficial to them.
Yeah.
But yeah, so like any of our client wins, like I think we're excited to share those wins with them and help them achieve that. And it's not always about like money. I guess that's the developer example. When it comes to like a homeowner,
Yeah.
when we're able to renovate their home and it's like beautiful and they're excited and this is like exactly what they want, I think that can be rewarding because it's like this is like a new way they're gonna be able to live. Like, and you help them achieve that. And it's amazing to see that you're bringing that like to helping them achieve that. So that's incredibly rewarding.
Yeah.
And even just like the process of like having something in your mind, like you're saying, and then bringing it into life. I think that just in itself is like why I love architecture. It's just that process. And then your, I guess, second question was about the opposite, right? Like,
yeah, like when you finish the project, you're like, oh man, like I know this part of the component, maybe I could have changed
right,
to get a better outcome.
Yeah, maybe it's like the evolution of our business. Like, I think at a certain point, we would be willing to almost help everyone out or try to. And I think in doing that for a little while, I think sometimes just realizing like this project isn't a good fit for us. And it's okay saying no, like, we can't help you, or sorry, we're not the best fit for this project. I think
is that mid project or usually
no, beforehand.
Yeah.
It's just like somebody comes up to us and say, hey, we have this situation or this kind of project. Can you say help us in like, can you be our architect? Could you help us get a building permit, or can you help us design that?
Yeah.
And I think earlier on in their practice, we'd say like yes to everything and try to, and almost be like, oh, I'm trying to help everyone, like to say no is almost like saying no of helping them.
Yeah.
And I think understanding no isn't a bad thing, and finding that boundary, and then maybe like finding our niche. I think that's been a process. So I guess to be more specific to your question is like, there's been maybe projects in the past we've taken on and you're like, oh, after doing this, maybe I wouldn't do that kind of project again. Yeah. Exactly.
So if other people that are in the space of actually building and listening to this, what are some of the, so that they save you time, if they're in this situations, or like, are there any red flags that you'd be like, sorry, like Mr. Mrs. Client, like we cannot help you in this way, but we know somebody else can. For you, is there some of the criteria for you at this moment?
Yeah, I think it depends on like, one is the type of project. Is it something that we're comfortable working within? Is it a project that we're experienced with? Is it a project that we think that we can reasonably provide expertise to, or are they better served by somebody else? Also, like the level of support, I think they might feel they need. Like if they want us to be more hands-on, then they should be a little bit closer to where we can physically serve, as opposed to like maybe they're in Sudbury. If we take that on,
right? Yeah, and Sudbury is a city way up north. I think it's like at least 4 hours, even more. Yeah, up north of Toronto. So then,
so like if they're like 3-4 hours away, are they understanding that we can't, be on site?
Yeah,
consistently
to be hands on.
Yeah, exactly. And is that something they reasonably can't handle? Or, is that not enough like customer service to what they're looking for? In which case, maybe we suggest they work with somebody more local.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah. And if I see an array of entrepreneurs that I know in my network, even as friends like yourself, one of the things that it comes to mind is like how they deal with relationships. But let me know, by the way, if you need more water.
Oh, yeah, maybe.
You're like choking here.
I have a bit of a cough. So.
That out. Yeah, no worries.
Okay, no worries.
So yeah, one of the things that I again, in an array of entrepreneurs that I know, one of the things I think you're really good at is keeping it really cool. And you're right at the intersection between people with like that are wanting to design with their money, that wants their dream to be established in reality, versus people that are keeping the boundaries, like the city, the bylaws, and then sometimes I'm sure there's people that run out of money and then, or like something else happens and then now you need more money to get the project done.
Right.
And
Yeah.
they'll be calling. I think I called you once, like when one of my inspections didn't pass. I'm like, Victoria, like what do I do?
Yeah.
How do you keep yourself cool in these hot situations?
Yeah, that's a funny question. I feel like a lot of people think I'm like chill, but I have no chill actually. And then maybe that's a good thing that people think I'm chill. So I think I keep it under wraps. But I think that's your role ultimately as an architect, right? Like, and maybe it's kind of like any leadership position where, if other people are freaking out, you're not allowed to freak out, right? Like you need to keep your cool. You need to be like, don't worry, we got this. We're going to get you through it. We have a solution. And I think, like people come to me as like the one that is like the fixer, the finding the solution. So it's not an option for me to freak out really. Like I need to find the answer. People come to me for the answer.
So let's role play. Let's say I'm an angry client because something just came up and one of the contractor working on site told me, it's gonna cost another $100,000.
Yeah.
Like what, Victoria? Like what's going on? Like this guy says this has a problem with this. What's going on? Like how do you respond to that?
Yeah, like I think ultimately, I always try to redirect the conversation so it's solutions focus, right? So it's like, this is the situation we're in. How are we going to get out of it? It's not like who did it, who's like, if we're going to blame people, like let's blame people after we have a solution, right? So like I kind of direct it that way.
Okay,
but
that's smart.
Yeah, so I try to stay solutions focused, and it's like, okay, what are the main issues at hand? How do we resolve that? If it's about money, how do we find the most cost-effective solution? How do we find the fastest solution? Usually that's related to money as well. And then, deal with it. And then you can have like a retro about like, how did we come to this place? How do we avoid it? That kind of conversation.
Are there phrases that you say to sort of like, some people say like when somebody's coming out with some emotion, you sort of like match their energy. Do you say stuff like, to say like, oh, I understand you're angry, or like any of that, or just like, okay.
That's funny. I don't know if I have I'm the best example of that. I just try not to be reactive. Like if they're incredibly angry, I'm not going to match their anger, right? I'm just like, I'll sit there and listen, and I can try to understand where they're coming from, but again, like be more solutions focused. But like I think that's the last thing you want to do is like match their anger and then be in a shouting match.
Right.
But it's tricky, like architecture, construction, like a lot of money is at stake. And like at a certain point, if it does get like crazy like that, then, like the worst thing is then you get lawyers involved and then everybody's not talking and then nobody's coming out with a solution, right? So I think just understanding that, and again, staying solutions focused is the way to go, because I think I've been in situations where, they're like, maybe a situation happened, they're upset. I'm like, listen, I'm on your side. Like just reminding them, like, I'm going to be the one that helps you out of this. So if you're like, if you're angry at me, like put that anger aside for now, because we are here to help you. And I think that reminding them that is like we're here to help you. Like you can't ultimately, in a way, kind of like just cut off your architect, let's say, because like then who's there to help you? Like you might be incredibly like upset, but like the same people you're upset at like will likely be the ones that help you get out of it too, and then again have that conversation after to see how you can avoid things.
If you cut your architect out, you'll just be a nomad with a dream, and
and like
cut them out.
It can happen, like usually it's the other way around. Like we've had clients who are like, oh, I fired my architect, and then now like we're hoping to like have you on board.
Interesting.
And you're like, oh, okay. And then the other hand, then we need to we need to ask them serious questions of like, how did that come to be? And like what caused that issue? And what is the root cause? And do we even want to be involved in that kind of project if that happens, right? So I don't. Yeah, that's like its own can of worms.
So I think let's go there. Common mistakes that people that are in their new building stages make. So these are some of the common mistakes I think people make, because I made them. First one is thinking that they can do it all by themselves. So they would be the general contractor, they would be the renovation person,
Yeah.
thinking that they're going to save money if they just do it over a long period of time.
Yeah.
There's that mistake. And then also in terms of materials, like using the cheapest stuff, thinking that if you buy it cheap and then flip it and sell it, it's going to work out. But it's
Right.
like it turns out to be terrible.
Mm.
Are there other common mistakes that you see, like new clients? Can I say it that way? Newer clients,
Yeah.
when they come to you, they're like, "What? Like, I didn't know this was a thing that you could make mistakes on."
Yeah. It's kind of like anything related to, I think it's called the Dunning-Kruger effect, right? Like
What is that called?
I think it's like there's a saying or a study that's made like you know enough to be like dangerous, essentially, right? So you
Oh,
think you
interesting.
know, and you're gonna do as much as you're like by yourself of
Yeah.
something. Let's say it's general contracting or renovations,
Yeah.
because you're like, oh, I know a little bit,
Mm.
and then you get yourself in trouble because you know enough to get yourself confident in doing the thing, but you actually don't know enough to do it because you're not, say, a general contractor, let's say, right? Or like an architect.
masters
Yeah.
and like hours and hours.
So someone might be like, oh, I'll do the drawings, and then you just stamp them for me. I'm like, absolutely not, because
Right.
you don't know and you haven't had the education. You might think you know, but you might not know. And I think that's where that's when, like, as you get into, say, development, I find
Yeah.
real estate development, some people get a little bit dangerous because, oh, I've done a renovation before,
Yeah.
but then you've never done new build construction,
Yeah.
and you've never done like a much larger project, which with a lot more money at stake. And that's when you know enough to be dangerous
Yeah.
and get yourself in trouble, and that trouble sometimes can be irreversible.
Right.
So I think it could be, like you said, doing more than you really should. And then I think at a certain point, a project gets so big that you realize, oh, this is like beyond me. I must hire some professionals. I must build my team.
Right.
And I think that's great. When you have that realization, the lead up to that point can be the most dangerous, right? Until you have that realization, like, I need to build a team. I need the professionals. So biting off more than you can chew. And then again, sometimes people get themselves in that situation where it's almost like irreversible.
Is there a math formula for that? So for example, when I tackled my own reno and I'm building it down to the stud, which means I broke down the walls, the flooring, and by code, even the drywall, I thought it was only gonna take me 3 to 4 months.
Yeah.
But it took me a whole flipping year just doing it by myself. And I wore the badge of honor, and I'm like, I'm never doing this again.
Yeah.
I'm gonna hire Victoria and other people that are more professional. Do you find maybe there's like a bit of a math? So if somebody's at home listening, they want to do a new build or even a extension or not a, what's that, garden suite?
Garden suite, like an ADU.
Yeah, additional units. Like, is there, in terms of time or money, is there a calculation that maybe you should sort of, you've seen on hand? They said, oh, I started with a maybe 10K budget, but it turned out to be like they spent 100 and.
I think it really depends on like the value of your time and the money related to that. I think it really depends on like where you're at in the journey, right? Because like it's so easy for us to say, like, now if you like been doing a couple projects and you're like, oh yeah, just like hire someone else to do it, right? But like when you're starting out, say in like buying property and renovating, like maybe you have more time than it is money. So it does make sense to trade your time to like do some of the work yourself. So I think there's a time and place for both. But I think at a certain point when the value of your time is worth more than the monetary value of like hiring someone else to do it, then so I think you have to make that calculation of like what your time is worth, what the monetary value is of like the cost of that, and then also time related to like the holding costs too, and then also your own like mental health, let's say, right? Like as the project drags on, like your own stress level, I'm sure, increases. So like what is that worth to you? And people have different thresholds of that. Another example is, let's say, a homeowner, like if their renovation drags on and like they don't have a kitchen, is that going to have undue stress on the family? So maybe it is worth paying a little bit more to have somebody do it faster. Another example is like an entrepreneur. If if like the project is causing so much stress, some people want to scale fast and like buy 5 properties and have 5 renovations going on.
Yeah.
But that's incredibly stressful. Maybe that's something they could handle, but another person with like lower threshold for that, they'll be like, no way, I'm gonna die, you know, like it's too stressful. So I think a bit of knowing yourself, but then like putting like a number to like what your time and that's worth.
And I think that's so true, because my wife, as I was in this middle of the build, you know, I go to 9 to 5, my work, come home because that's when we had our first son. And it was like a couple months, like 6 months or something.
Yeah.
And we would have dinner for 1 hour, and then I would head out and come home at like 1 a.m.
Yeah.
And my wife was like, you know, I never asked for this. I'm like, what do you mean? Like, and I actually have not communicated to her.
Yeah.
I'm like, honey, I'm doing this because I think by the end, when we finish the renovation, our property will be worth this much, so we can unlock like this much of money. And she's like, I never asked for that. I want you to come home and just spend time. Like, I thought you were doing the renovation because you enjoyed it. It's like,
right, yeah.
No, I was doing it for the family. She's like, I never asked for it. It's like, oh.
Yeah, different like values. You're like, oh, like you're both thinking that you're doing what's best, but you're like, oh, like you had different values in mind.
Exactly.
Yeah. So that I think that makes a lot of sense. And you know, I still fall into this trap too. You like doing a lot of the stuff myself when maybe I shouldn't. But sometimes you have to do it and learn the lesson. You know, like
it's an expensive lesson, yeah.
Yeah, maybe, but like sometimes it's expensive and sometimes like I don't know. But like here to give you a story. Like there was a time when I was like renovating property, and I thought it'd be a great idea to like use the appliances. And then, like on Facebook Marketplace.
Yep.
And then I like put them into the rental I have, right? The problem with Facebook Marketplace, you got to like collect it here and there. And then like, where do you put them? And then I was like, oh, I have a great idea. I'm going to like collect them all up in this garage that I have, this rental property. And then it was at Mississauga.
Yeah.
And then I'm going to rent a truck, and I'm going to drive an hour and a half to this other rental property I have. And I'm going to place like the appliances there. And coincidentally, the day I chose to move these appliances was like a snowstorm in Canada. So I was like, oh, but I was like, in my mind, I planned it. I have to go. I also have a showing that day. So it's like, we have to go. And then my partner was like, no, like, cancel your appointment. Don't want to do this. This is a bad idea. I was like, no, we're doing this. And then we like rented a U-Haul. It had like ball tires that like not good for snow at all. We did it. Saw like tons of like cars on the side of the road because they spun out.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, that like guess that could like be us. And like overall we did it, and I realized that was a bad idea. Like that's so stupid. Like, was it worth potentially like getting in a car accident? And like, why am I doing this anyway? Like to save like $100 or something, or a couple $100. It's like I probably should have just paid somebody to install and like deliver the appliances, save my time, save my partner's time, save the fact that we might have gotten into like a car accident in a snowstorm. But you know, I think for me, I'm stubborn and I had to live through it to be like, oh yeah, that's incredibly stupid, and I'm thankful that nothing happened, and I'm never gonna do it again. So gonna have to live through it. Like you have to face your failure, mistake, and be like, oh, I'll forever remember that.
And maybe it's the Asianness we grew up with. Like, no. Everyone's saying like red flag, danger. We're like, nah, you guys don't know.
It totally is, to be honest. Like, I think this is such a side conversation, but like in going through entrepreneurship, I was telling my partner the other day, like there's a lot that I had to unlearn. Like a lot of what you're praised on in like doing well in school and getting good marks and like being a good kid, you know, in the Asian, on following the rules. It's not good for entrepreneurship. It's like you should not be doing everything yourself. You should be hiring. You should be delegating. If you don't want to do it, don't do it. You know, you don't need to like power through and be like the smartest person in the room.
And that's okay. Yeah.
And that's okay. And actually that's better. And it's like I had to like unlearn all of that going through like entrepreneurship, because I was like, this is the exact opposite of like what I've been taught and praised for. And you're not a hero for doing it all. And I had to like unlearn a lot of that.
That's so good. That's That's a message to other young, stubborn Asian people.
Maybe
I'm speaking to my younger self.
the things I don't even have kids yet, and then that's where like I'm in thinking about conflict. Like should you encourage? I think there's a lot you can learn, and being a good student, being studious and hardworking.
Yeah.
On the other hand, there's a lot of rules that you shouldn't need to follow that is taught in the school system that would lend well to be an entrepreneur. And not everybody wants to be an entrepreneur either.
Right.
So then it's kind of like, there's good and bad in both potentially. And like finding the right time and place to like teach that to someone like a kid.
Yeah, that's so true. Like even we're now entering our 7th year of marriage, and we're finding like, wow, there's different personalities. Cause like we're studying, there's like a small group at our church that's like couples, where we're studying about relationships. And I'm finding out like, man, it's like, that's why I'm such an angry kid. And that's why I'm in such a conflict with my young son since he was able to say some couple words. Like, it was so funny. My wife's like telling me, like, you know how silly it is? Like a 30-something old man yelling at the top of his lung. And also like the 1-year-old baby shouting back at the top of his lung. Of how much of a conflict was in terms of a character. But yeah, I digress.
Yeah, like I think it must like uncover like, oh, like where is that rooted from, and like what are you really fighting about, right? Like, yeah.
It really, as you say, like it did a lot of undoing of what I've learned in the system of like trying to be parents pleasers or like trying to live their dreams. And you're right, there's so much to unpack there, even with education. Is there any stories you can share about maybe negotiations with clients or maybe with customers that you've had to sort of negate your way through to make it work? Yeah.
So architecture is an interesting one. Like relative to the amount of schooling and the work put in to get our license, like it's as much as being like a doctor, right? Like, so in Canada, like I have a 5-year undergrad, so it's like 4 to 5 year undergrad. Then you're doing a master's degree. That's usually like 1 to 2 years. So you're in it like me. I was in it for 7 years in school. And then after, you need to get your hours to get licensed. Like that's another 3 years working under an architect. And then you have to write exams, and there's other courses. So, that process, let's say you're looking at 10 plus years.
Right.
And then for context, say I was making under 40K my first job out of like school.
And this is after you're done your hours.
No, like this is like maybe after my undergrad.
Yeah.
So like after 5 years of school, I'm making less than 40K.
Right.
And without your license, in a way, you're kind of like an artist. Like
it's not, you're not
right,
an
because you don't
architect.
have a license, you don't have a stamp. So like, what is your paper really showing? It's like, oh, I know how to do pretty drawings, and like that. Like if you think of it very practically, and like, not really, but like if you objectively look at it, you're like, oh, you know how to do pretty drawings.
That stings.
So yeah, exactly, it does sting. But if you're kind of looking at it very objectively, there's that, right? Only until you have your license, then you're like, oh, I can stamp drawings, and I could like help you pass inspection, that kind of thing. But okay, I digress. So yeah, relatively speaking, I guess architects don't really make that much, at least like salaries and whatnot.
Yeah.
So I guess the same thing translates sometimes to the business. And I don't know whether it's because architects are bad business people, but generally, like it doesn't always translate so well. Part of it might be because, like especially I can speak from like the education I got, you're just not taught business skills.
Let's talk about that, and we'll come back to the other question. Like, what projects have taught you about business and working with people?
Non-architecture person, like the real estate stuff. I think like understanding how to run the numbers and like why does this project make sense financially, and then being able to bring that to the architecture conversations of the projects. Be like, hey, I know the value I'm bringing, because let's say I bring you another unit, and that's bringing you an extra $2,000 in rent. And let's say minus the expenses, like this is your NOI every year. So this is the income you generate from that every year. And then based on the cap rate, which is like a multiplier. But yeah, so it's like, can I get you another $300,000 of value for $5,000 design fee, right? But I think putting it in those kind of terms is like, oh yeah, that's a no-brainer, no numbers wise. But if you don't know how to like communicate your value, then that's difficult. But yeah, so I guess a lot of like the business aspects I've learned was like from everything outside of architecture, like whether it's like taking like we went to University of Waterloo, like taking some of those entrepreneurship courses, like real estate endeavors, just like my own passion for business. And then that was like totally outside of like being a designer.
So I think that's such an important lesson to take away, because you've done a lot of schooling, and by the time you come out, you realize nobody's giving you the business skill to shake hands and make more money.
Yeah, exactly. And like being able to communicate in a way that resonates to clients that will pay you money, right? Like I always like to laugh a bit, like architects speak in a certain way, and like when you're going
they
to
speak in a certain way.
Oh yeah, there's like architecture speak, and like the way we're talking now, or the way I might talk to clients. It's more like layman's terms, right? Versus like a lot of what sometimes architects do is they talk about like design and what they can bring creatively and like what they're doing for
I love
like
the hand gestures.
you know, and it's like they don't necessarily care, right? Like unless that's what they're going for, like that's not. So like speaking in the language that, you know, somebody's paying you for your services is like very important. And like I think it's one way to understand that concept, is another thing to like practice it, like truly understand like what does your customer want and what are they paying for and why are they paying you for that.
Okay, aside from the actual lived business experiences from doing real estate, negotiating deals, and learning from school, entrepreneurship class, are there other venues, or maybe you've read books or coaches, you got coaches that you've gotten skills to learn to negotiate and like talk to people better?
Yeah, like I think
to ultimately benefit your business that you're running.
Yeah. I think like reading books is definitely helpful. Like a lot of like lessons in like even the unlearning that we talked about. It's just like that was like a lesson like from the book. Right. There's like who, not how. It's just like, oh yeah, I think I thought I was the hero in doing everything. I really prided myself in like knowing a lot of things and being able to do it. And like, if you're not doing it yourself, then you're like a lesser kind of person. I was like, oh, and reading that, it was like, oh yeah, that's exactly how I thought. And I now see the flaws in that. And so a lot of business books, I think, kind of taught about maybe the tactics of it. But I think until you're doing it, I didn't truly like understand the lessons of like negotiating. I don't think I'm like the best negotiator even still, but like I think only through doing, I think I truly learned those lessons. And then coaching and some like consultant courses that I've like paid for. I think I'm now believing in the fact of like paying for faster answers. Like I think I never would, like I love saving money, you know, maybe it's like classic Asian thing, but like I think I'm now more willing, like I know this information might be out there, but like if I need to know now, and there's like consequences in like not doing something now. So like paying for coaching or paying for a consultant to give me answers faster and or to coach me through like this is a skill I need to learn. And I think it's a lot of that.
One of our conversation was like, you realize because it's a service based, you're trading time, and you're now trying to come up with different products, even with the software, so that your time can be bought back, and then you now are building yourself a business, not based on your time.
So I guess it's true. Maybe it like part of it is the thinking that like service-based companies can be very like labor intensive, takes up a lot of time unless you build your systems and kind of get that in place so that it takes less of my time. So one, I do need to get that more in check, like get my systems in place so it's less of my time. But I guess the idea is that, if I build a product, the goal would be it takes, even less of my time to like scale the company, as opposed to, I think there's like a certain limitation to how much you can scale versus how much time you have in. And maybe that's like a limiting belief I have right now, which is like limiting the capacity of like I can make. So I'm aware of that, that possibility, and probably it does exist.
Can you shine your light? I think you also had a course, right?
Yeah.
Can you shine some light on like how that process was, and like, was it successful? Were you satisfied
In
with
creating
it?
a course?
Yeah.
Yeah, like I think so. I created a course about how to like unlock the highest and best use of like property. So help people evaluate land and
Be able to build more on what they have, right?
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Look at the zoning, look at how much you can build, what's the possibility, and it was I wouldn't say it was the most successful. Had a little bit of uptick, but ultimately, like building a course is a lot of work. This is like pre-AI stuff, or slightly pre-AI.
Yeah.
So now maybe it'd be a little bit easier. So that was a little bit of the goal, like creating a course, creating a product that could then be
Replacing your time.
replace a little bit of my time, and it could be another revenue source. And I think it still could be a possibility. I think it just took away from my core business. So I think I saw a lot more opportunity in like just focusing on like what I was doing and making that a lot better than like branching out into like other potential revenue sources.
That's another thing, because entrepreneurs starting out, they shiny object syndrome, they could be called that, but I'm the worst at this. Like I try one thing and then I do start another one, my whole momentum goes away like each year.
Yeah. So I felt like a little bit of my time was being spread too thin in building that and going through that process. So I think I shifted back to like my core business. Not to say like I think it still could be a very much a good outlet, but I think I realized that requires its own time. You know, like I think to make it successful, I'd want to like build its own community and have like course, and then like maybe have a couple courses that it can build on that. And I think that would require way more time. I think in investing in that would take away from my core business that I didn't want to do.
What is your bottleneck in your multiple six-figure business in architecture right now?
What is my bottleneck? I think it's me. Right, or beyond me.
What?
Like I think I need, some like an assistant. I don't have an assistant right now, and I think just replacing myself, like evaluating everything I do. I think I've been reading Dan Martell's book,
Buy Back Your Time.
And it's just like, okay, what do I do? What do I enjoy doing and not enjoy doing? And like, what can be replaced and like delegated? So I'm kind of going through that process. And a lot of like administrative tasks and a lot of, I think kind of sales things. And finding the right times, like, is it time to like delegate this or at least systematize it so then eventually somebody can take that on.
Yeah, that's really cool. That's also encouraging to the listeners to see how far you're able to get, because by working by yourself, but I think you have different contractors and partners here and there, but you built up a multiple six-figure business. So that should be also encouraging. But at the same time, not to go through that and what was that effect?
Oh, Dunning-Kruger's effect?
Yeah, Dunning-Kruger effect.
Yeah, like relying on the professionals. Like if I'm going to go into like marketing and sales, like hiring somebody that knows that more than me and like not feeling like I need to grind through it. Because I think, I think having the upgrading of like, no, you need to grind. Like that's the price you pay to do this. It's
that's
like, no, you don't need to actually. You have to like.
That's the old way of thinking. Unlearn that, folks.
Yeah, exactly. And then the second thing is like, knowing like this is not the end. I think there's so much we always think like, oh, like if I become an architect, I'm going to be trapped.
That is so good.
If I start this architecture business, I'm trapped and like I have to do that. But it's like, no, like I think the more I've done things, I think the more I realize like this is not the end. It will evolve. And it's the next step. But it will lead to other opportunities that, may be what you're meant for. So I think that's sometimes it wouldn't have stopped me, but it would have made me hesitate because I'm like, I don't want to do that. I don't want to like get trapped in this, but it's like, it's not a trap. It's just where you're going and you're going to evolve.
Yeah, I know what that is. That's a social promise that we've learned in the school system, saying like, you just got to do all that to make it into that job, stay for the next 40, 50 years and get your pension. But that social promise, we know it doesn't work for everybody. And so. Yeah.
And it's becoming less true. And I guess even less true in entrepreneurship where you're kind of forced to evolve all the time. So I think if that's what scares you, like this is it, it's like that doesn't exist in entrepreneurship.
So as we sort of wrap the conversation here, If there was any advice you'd like to give to your younger 20 self as you're coming out of school, you're still somewhat involved in real estate,
Mm-hmm.
but I think there was a moment where you've decided I'm going to open up my own thing and then do my own, and it was just called BuildxDesign, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, are there any advices you'd like to give to your younger Victoria?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I feel like there's not too much I think I would do differently than I've already done. Um, or like, so like thinking about the advice is like,
Or like maybe regrets. It could be regrets as well. Like as you're growing the company, you're like, oh, maybe I won't do this again. Or
I don't think so.
lessons you've
I
learned.
don't think I have any regrets right now. I think like just thinking back to myself, it'd be like, I was gonna say like starting sooner, but like I don't know how I
Oh,
could
starting
start sooner.
sooner.
Yeah,
Yeah,
like
yeah.
in maybe the business aspect. I guess there's one thing I will think about. Like
Hmm.
I think in being in architecture school, I was a little bit self-conscious of myself, of my own self as an architect.
Hmm.
Like because I was in such a like a competitive environment.
Yep.
I would say I wasn't the best students by any means. I did have a lot of like self-belief, like I'm gonna do great things and I don't know what's gonna be, but you know, like I believed in myself. But like there's definitely a lot of like self-consciousness I had within like the architecture community, and maybe even still a little bit.
When you
And
say that, do you mean like, oh, I'm not good enough, self-conscious, or like,
yeah, maybe like to some degrees that, you know, like
hmm,
I don't believe I'm the best
oh,
architect per
right.
se,
Hmm.
like within my class, like an architecture school.
Yeah.
So then I think I had a bit of that in my mind.
Hmm.
But like I always at the same time had a counteracting belief of like, if not me, then who? You know, so
Yeah.
like I think that still kept me pushed forward.
Hmm.
But I still in the back of my mind still would be like, oh, I'm not like the best in class, you know. So I feel like I'm holding back myself a little bit.
Hmm.
So I think is to maybe not let that not let that self-consciousness be like something that holds me back. I think I overcame it, but I think I could have maybe put myself out there more, you know?
Is that the difference? If you sort of overcame that thought, you would have put yourself out more.
Yeah, I think so. Like I think
Like
maybe that's something,
networking, or yeah.
or maybe that's something I still deal with to some degree. It's
Mm.
like, okay, there's like the architect, the design, it's like everything that you've been like trained to do, and like that's the aspiration to be.
Yeah.
And then there's like the business side, the entrepreneur side, and it's like, oh, like don't talk about that. You know, like if it, like in school is like,
Yeah.
like it's less about the business, it's about like who you're, you know.
Oh,
So
interesting.
I think putting you know that, you know, it's kind of like the two worlds that I live within. It's kind of like a little bit self-conscious when I'm talking about like the business side of the architecture, because it's, oh, like should I not be talking about this? I should only be talking about like design and creative things and like, you know, like what we bring to the world, as opposed to like making money, you know.
Yeah.
And not that I think it's wrong by any
Right.
means, but I think that like two worlds colliding
Yeah.
is something that I still kind of I don't know, haven't fully resolved maybe in my mind. So I think I've been more self-conscious about it coming out of architecture school, which maybe was like what held me back a little bit.
Yeah.
And I think that's what maybe would be some advice to my younger self is like, don't be so concerned about that. Just like follow what you are passionate about and trust yourself that, you know, like you're doing something that's good.
Yeah.
And like, I don't know, like I think you'll find your way, and I think there'll always be people that are not liking what you're doing,
Right.
or liking what you're doing.
Right.
But I think ultimately, like you just need to be like confident in yourself and what you're doing, and trust that you're doing a good thing.
I think that principle you talked about, how you're living in two different worlds, but you're trying to like with the best ability try to merge it and
Yes.
really try to create a whole new world in between it, because that is the whole topic that I see with every younger entrepreneurs that are starting. They're like, I see this in the market and I'm tired of it. I have my own thing that I know how to put a spin on it. And I think it's encouraging to hear that even with somebody with this much experience is also saying like, hey folks, I'm still figuring it out.
Yeah.
Right. And I think if maybe I'll share one story. When I went to Dan Martell's social summit back in April, I was in his VIP and he literally sat even closer to, like he was sitting, it was a corner of the table.
Yeah.
So like he was sitting like at arm's length, right? But in the conversation, there's a question that I really want to ask. And the question was coming from like literally my soul. And the question was what his opinion was about like faith, like understanding the universe, God, right? And actually it was a Q&A section and he was saying like, as you ask your question, can you also tell me why that's important for you? And so I told him it was important for me because for me growing up, finance, I don't think, or finance wasn't talked about, it wasn't stewarded in a nice conversation in a household. And so I want to see a person who not only crushed in their faith, but also crushed in their families as well as their like career, right? And when I asked that question and why it was important to me, he was just like, yes, I'm like, you just have to do you. Like, like nobody's gonna give you the permission and you have to do it. And it was so funny because when he said that, I was like, wow, he understands where I'm trying to go. Like the two different worlds trying to come together. And I also thought, if Dan was not there, would I still be able to see the picture? And the answer was yes. I think it would have taken a long more time. But for someone at the level that I'm sort of looking up to, acknowledge that like, yeah, you're right. You have the two different worlds and you're trying to like try to bridge it together. You just got to do you, right? You just got to do you. I didn't say that. You just got to do you,
But,
right?
like, yeah. I think that makes a lot of sense. It's like, yeah, you would eventually come to that realization, but he just put it so simply. You're like, oh yeah, that's right.
So that's the question I want to finish off in our conversation today, and we'll talk about what you're up to now. But if someone gave you the permission, someone that you look up to, be like, Victoria, the two worlds that you're seeing together that's trying to merge, like that's there and it's yours for yours to own.
Yeah.
What comes to mind?
Yeah, I think it'd be merging that world of like architecture, design, and building, real estate development. Like I think one of the dreams I have is just being able to build for myself, and the goal would be to have a positive impact on who I'm building for, there's a lot of talk about like affordable housing, if I could do that and do it financially responsibly and provide a service to build a better community, that'd be great.
So you're not just talking about building one house, like you're talking about building houses, communities,
or communities or larger developments. I think the passion to build is just to contribute and bring to other people. So I think, yeah, in some ways, because architecture is sometimes in conflict with the financial aspects, real estate development, I felt like they need to be apart. But in bringing them together, I think there's a lot of power and good that could come of that. So I think, yeah, doing more of that, I think would be a lot of fun.
Yeah, and that's also a lesson with all the entrepreneurs that are starting out. It's like money will always be an issue. Might be a type, but you have to learn how to be creative and work around it. Victoria, thanks so much for coming on to the podcast.
Yeah, thank you.
Where can we find you and what exciting things are you working on? And by the way, folks, if you haven't seen her work, go check out BuildxDesign.
Yes, BuildxDesign.
And then see the previous work she's done. That's like, wow, great. Yeah. But where can we find you and what other exciting things are you working on?
Yeah, so easiest way to find me is, say on my Instagram, our handle is at BuildxLab. And on my website, it's BuildxDesign.ca. And one of the exciting projects I'm working on right now is actually a platform that will help people type in an address and then determine if an ADU, garden suite, laneway suite is possible.
What's ADU garden suite?
Yeah.
What's that? Yeah, just
So
simple terms.
yeah, it's an additional dwelling unit. So essentially, you can build a house behind your main house. In Toronto, that's what's allowed as of right everywhere. So just seeing if you're eligible, and then over time, we're going to build out more capabilities, so I can tell you how much you can build, like area wise, number of stories, that kind of thing.
Would it also tell you like the rent, like how much rent you can charge? Because I'm sure people build more buildings to
Maybe
ultimately make more money too.
I think we're open to like getting feedback. So we're hoping not to like fully build it out. We're gonna like build it out like an MVP and then get user feedback to see what features and things are valuable.
Nice.
And then kind of
So
build
is this
it
like
out
a
from
wait
there.
list, or is that?
Yeah, so I think there's the sign up list. Hopefully I'll give you the link and you can share it below.
Yeah.
And anybody who's interested in signing up for like the early MVP, you can sign up there, and then we'll release some updates.
Yeah, for sure. Because like people in Toronto that have a house, they're always talking about, can I build another unit? I'm not sure if it's applicable in the States. Maybe I think so too.
Yeah, very much so. I see a lot of that happening on like the West Coast specifically, like
in the States. Yeah.
Yeah, around California, like Seattle.
Yeah. That would be pretty cool. As simple as a address you put in, and then you get to see how much you can build or not build.
Yeah, exactly.
That's
Trying to
pretty
automate
cool.
that process. So yeah, hopefully, if anybody's interested, please sign up.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thanks again. And then, we'll see you. Yeah. Come back again when the app goes live. And we'll love to talk more about that.
Yeah. Thanks.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Take care.